Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. This is Dean Jones, the Well-Seasoned Librarian. Today is Season 5, Episode 16, and I have a great guest on today, Lisa Amico Kristel, who is former owner of the restaurant South Edison in New York and is a upcoming novelist with her book, The Art of Conversation, which is a book that is fiction but also has some really wonderful recipes included in it. I had a great time talking to Lisa. In addition to all this, she's taught writing courses and she's written a lot of short fiction in addition, and she has a lot of food writing and recipes on her website, which we'll include in the bio. So check that out, and we're going to go right to the conversation. I really enjoyed talking to Lisa. I could have talked to her all day, and I'd be more than happy to talk to her again. Such a great conversationalist, and I feel like I've known her forever. So with that in mind, here we go to our conversation with Lisa Amico Kristel. Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. My name is Dean Jones, the Well-Seasoned Librarian, and today I'm very happy to be talking to guest Lisa Amico Kristel. Lisa, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm so honored.
Now, I want to talk to you about your writing and your career before you started working with doing food writing and restaurants. You're a past Ragdale Foundation resident, and you hold an AB in computer science from Brown University, which is pretty impressive, and an MA in English from Long Island University. You describe yourself as a recovering computer programmer and composition instructor. So let's talk about that a little bit. How did you like being in this field, and what kind of propelled you to get out of that and go working in food and teaching writing classes?
Yeah, well, I should address the fact that I use the word recovering. It does make it sound like I hated it, but I didn't. I really liked, I went into computer programming because first, I didn't know what to major in when I was 18, and I thought of English, but I said I should pick something that'll get me a job, and I picked computer programming, and I really loved it because of the detail and the precision. And you have to think of every scenario to be sure your program doesn't crash.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a lonely, solitary task, at least when I was doing it. It's the field I worked in. I wasn't on a team. I'm sure things are different now. When I use, I'm a graphic designer too, and when I use the Adobe software, you see all the authors of the programs. I don't know if they work together, but I'm sure they collaborate sometimes. But anyway, it was kind of a lonely, dry task. And I also did it in the first few years of my career, and I got married rather young and started having children early. So I did stop working. So then I was home with the food, and food has always been a huge part of my life. But as later, about 25 years later, I went back to school I thought I'd be a high school English teacher because I always loved literature. My house was a house full of books. My parents were always reading, and so were my siblings and I. And so I went back to get my master's in English, and I ended up being assigned a class as a grad student to teach freshman English, and I just stayed there because it was interesting. I love being in the classroom with the students. It was enlivening. I learned. As a teacher, you're always learning because you have to keep yourself up to date, and you learn from the kids. I really enjoyed that. And actually at the time, my children were about college age, so I could relate to them. It was helpful.
It's really wonderful. It's really wonderful to grow up in a house full of people that read. I know my brothers were big readers, and my brother would talk about reading Catcher in the Rye, my younger one, and then my other brother who's younger, he would also talk about reading Lord of the Rings, and it was always kind of thrilling to have. It's like when you have siblings that are into music, you share tapes, you get into different bands because of them, and books are the same way. Was that like that for you?
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you shared books with your siblings, but I think I would pick up my brother's books or my sisters that they were reading, but they were older than me. They were 6 and 7 years older. They are 6 and 7 years older than I am. So they were in high school and I was still in elementary school. So I didn't always share books with them, but I certainly listened to their music. And now that you mentioned that, I was 9. I remember laying on my dining room floor with my brother's headphones and listening to the entire White Album by the Beatles over and over again. And my sister actually plays, she doesn't play anything. Her 2 children are musicians. So there's a lot of music in our family too.
Yeah, to you youngsters who are listening to Spotify and iTunes, the only way you used to be able to get into music was if you had friends or siblings that listened to stuff. And that was, you didn't have access to everything.
Right.
Usually you would get information from somebody else. So a little bit different time.
Yeah. No, as far as books are concerned, my parents were always reading, and then we read a lot of, as soon as Stephen King wrote, I think it was it Carrie, his first book?
Yeah.
Or Salem's Lot. Either one. My sister and I read those, and then we read every single one of his books afterwards. And I guess my parents were just a good influence on us.
I love Salem's Lot so much. It's just, that's, I think, that'll always be a favorite of mine. I love everything he does, but I think that like Salem's Lot will always have a special place in my heart.
Yeah, it was scary. I think it's difficult to make somebody scared while they're reading a book. And he manages to do that time and again.
Oh, yeah. Now, tell us about the restaurant that you owned in New York. I've been really excited to talk to you about that, especially reading your book, The Art of Conversation. I just know, like, I've worked a little bit, I think I've told you this, I worked a little bit in restaurants, not like really heavily, but I've had enough experience so that some of it makes sense to me when I read about stuff that people are writing. And I had to laugh at certain things. Like there's always the claustrophobic office overstuffed with stuff. There's always the walk-in and everything. So I really got a feeling that you had some real experience there. So tell us about your restaurant and what you had in it and your experience working with it.
Sure. So the restaurant in New York City was sadly closed during quarantine. It was Beau's Kitchen and Bar Room. It was right on 24th Street, right near Italy, which you may have heard of.
Yeah.
And we already had the restaurant in Montauk called South Edison that was doing really well. That was open from 2010. And then 2013, my husband said, let's have a restaurant in New York City. And we partnered with, it wasn't only our restaurant. And one of our partners was Beau, who is Beau Young. He's a good friend of ours. And his father is Andrew Young. You may have heard of him. He was mayor of Atlanta. He was Martin Luther King's partner during the civil rights movement. And he's also a friend of the family. And his grandmother was from New Orleans. So originally Beau's menu was a riff on foods from that area in honor of Andrew's grandmother. And also we designed the restaurant together with our chef, who is Todd Mitgang. Currently, he runs Crave Fish Bar on the Upper East and the Upper West Side, and another restaurant, Taco Vision, which he's amazing. So he came with us from South Edison over to help us design the menu at Beau's. And the food was very, very good. And it became, however, afterwards, a bar. The bar became more popular because the after work crowd was big there. So we kind of started downsizing our dinner menu and adding more small plates, which if you read my book, you'll recognize I mentioned that Winston or Eddie, one of the characters, says, small plates are important now. So that came right from the restaurant. And the entire layout of the restaurant in my book is very similar to what how Beau's is set up. And of course, I spent a lot of time there. I didn't work in the kitchen. I did the graphic design, the business cards, the advertisements, but I was always there, either eating or walking into the kitchen to see how they were doing, or hanging out in the teeny tiny office that was crowded with stuff. So
now, how many people that you work with made their way into The Art of Conversation? Are there any characters that are loosely based on people?
So nobody that works for the restaurant is like, well, no one in the book is like anyone from my real restaurant. But that's a good question because I was thinking about it. There's probably not a single person in my family that doesn't have some sort of anxiety. Nothing like my very nervous character, Winston, thank goodness. But we've all been known to count our pulses on occasion. Well, some of us, let's say all of us, some of us. And then, oh, Winston loves symmetry. I don't know if you remember on page 1, he says, 10:01, nice symmetry, but I'm late. That's me. I look at the clock and I've been known to yell, it's 11:11. I don't know, I'm very strange. So Winston has characteristics from me, people in my family. There's a scene when at the very end when somebody says, did you have a broomstick for breakfast? And that came right from a friend of mine who, a ski instructor, said that to him because he was standing too far upright. And then Julia Child. I have a love affair with Julia Child since I'm a little girl. And I love the real Julia Child and Dan Aykroyd's version of her. So that had to be in my story. And then you remember the novel Julie and Julia that became a movie. I was reading that to my mother when near the end of her life, she was in the hospital very often. And I was reading it to her and I read the scene of Julia Child bravely volunteering to make scrambled eggs in her first cooking class in France. And then she explains how the professor or the instructor told her how to make eggs. And that's in my story. So
I love that. I love how everything seems a lot of the characters seem very real. You really flesh out many of the characters and make them like, I feel like I've known them. And I feel like so many of the minor characters, there's like a Moorishness about them. I would love to see a sequel where they're kind of being reintroduced. So I hope that you have plans for that.
Thank you so much. That's a nice compliment.
So let's talk about the art of conversation, since I kind of forced that ahead in the list of questions. Tell us about your book, The Art of Conversation. For the people who are listening who haven't read it, can you give us like a synopsis of the book and talk about how you were inspired to write it?
Sure, I can give you a quick pitch. I've been writing it on top of query letters again and again. So
Oh, yeah.
The Art of Conversation is a story about family, friendship, and food. It's stuffed with plenty of cooking, and I have recipes available, served up with a ghost, and seasoned with a dash of corporate crime. And it's the tale of 22-year-old Winston, who's a socially awkward restaurant accountant whose life flies in new directions when magical forces deliver him an apartment in New York City, a vintage self-help book called The Art of Conversation, of course, and Ethel, the ghost of its author, who's charged with helping Winston overcome his social woes. So that's the quick version. The reason I wrote it many, many years ago, I started it so long ago, I'm embarrassed to tell you when it was, but it's probably better because I wasn't as good a writer then. It took me a long time to figure out how to be a good writer, or at least a decent one. But anyway, when I was working at Long Island University as a teacher, they always had a used book sale. And I picked up this book. Actually, I could show it to you, but the listeners can't see it. I found this book, The Art of Conversation.
Oh my God.
And I was like,
there is a real one.
Oh yeah, it's real. And
it doesn't fly around though, right?
I'm sorry?
It doesn't fly around though, right?
No, it doesn't fly. And I haven't yet met Ethel, the ghost of its author. And by the way, I checked with a copyright lawyer, and all my use of the author's name and anything I use from the book is all on the up and up. It's legal. And also I make up, the book didn't actually, not everything fits, but some of the quotes I use are right from the book. And what I loved about it was I found this book and the author, Ethel Cotton, really wanted to help wallflowers become social beings. But then I was also interested in her complete naivety. She really believed that this box of lessons and worksheets and voice culture practice and series of silly couplets, is it chatter? Does it matter? Would actually do the trick. Some of them actually border on insulting, which is in my novel, because she kind of is almost a little misogynistic, I guess because she's from 1930, and or not, just women have a certain place. And then And then shortly thereafter, Dale Carnegie's iconic book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, came out.
Oh, yeah.
And I just pictured poor Ethel Cotton feeling so upset about this. So that night after I bought the book, I remember telling my husband, I should write a book about this, a sweet, shy 40-year-old guy who's never dated, finding this book in an antique store, and he uses it to find his way to romance. And then like right then, The 40-Year-Old Virgin came out, that movie. So
Yep.
I was like, So when I still pursued the story, but I changed the character to a younger man. I put him working. He actually originally worked in an e-discovery firm, which is a business my husband went into after he retired. And when I tell you about the authors I like, I'll tell you which one told me that was kind of boring. And I write really well about food. So maybe I should focus on food some more in this novel.
Yeah,
anyway.
It's nice to have that touchstone because I think it makes things really real. I think food is like a touchstone that we all have.
Right. And I was writing about computer programming, which I knew.
Yeah.
Although I did have to research it a little because when I was writing programs, it was C. And then I discovered, and it's more than 10 years ago, that C++ was the common language at the time. And I really had to do some research. But anyway, I got rid of the programming. That's gone. But I was really lucky to have signed up for a writer's workshop in 2013. I mean, prior to that, I was workshopping the same 60 pages of this completely unfinished novel all over different workshops, maybe one a year. And then I worked with Thea Obrecht, who is an incredible author. She won the Orange Prize, which is now the Women's Prize for Fiction, when she was only 25. But not only that, she's a wonderful person. And she liked my writing. And she said, how much do you have done? I want to see it when it's done, or 80%. I said, I have 60 pages. She goes, okay, you get that written and then show it to me. And she's been very, very kind and read a couple of really long and overblown drafts, poor thing, but helped me a lot. She's the one who suggested that I should have Winston work in a kitchen. But I couldn't see that. He was way too shy to work on the line because you worked
yeah.
He couldn't do it.
No, you can't be shy doing that.
Yeah, I gave him a peripheral job, an accountant for a restaurant group. So that seemed to work. And then it allowed me to write even more about food. And I love that. So.
Any thoughts for, I can really see this as a film or a TV series on Netflix. What do you think about that idea?
Well, Dean, I think that's a fabulous idea. I wish somebody else would think it's a good idea too. I work with the woman that I ran my author series with, Robin Martin. We've become very good friends. She's a wonderful writer. And we help each other with our writing. We read each other our work and critique each other's work. And she says it's a movie. It's definitely cinematic. You have to make this a movie. I was like, well, I need to get it published first. So.
Anyway, maybe Timothée Chalamet playing Winston. What do you think of that?
Oh, it's funny. He's too beautiful, I think. I think Winston's cute, but he's chubby and goofy. He's a little goofy. So I always have, he's way too old. I forgot his name. But Jason Segel?
Yeah. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Jason, you're not that old, but he's funny and he's a little chubby face and sweet. And I kind of picture it, it's more of a friendship story. So I kind of picture it like a bromance between Eddie and Winston, that he's learning how to have friends when he meets Eddie. So
I don't know who could be good to play Eddie. Eddie's a great character. I think Eddie's my favorite character in the whole thing.
Oh, good. That's funny. Yeah. Who is his inspiration? I don't know. I know I've seen my son watch football all the time and talk about the Jets. And he actually, I had to ask him, I wrote the scene where Winston is talking about football at the Thursday night football at someone's apartment. And I had my son check it and help me with the technical things I was trying to say, because he knows everything about it.
Eddie's great though. I really
Yeah.
I love that character. He's really
Oh,
fun. I
thanks.
mean, I could hang out with him. Like he and I could hang out a bit.
Yeah, he probably would have fun. And I did try to redeem him a little bit at the end, that he found his place, his talent at the end, because he was pretty lazy in the beginning.
Yeah. Everybody's got a friend like Eddie, though. I think we all have had.
Mhm.
I think as a guy, I've had at least 5 or 6 friends like Eddie.
Do you still
It's
hang out with them?
yeah. So we stay in touch every once in a
That's
while if
good.
they're in the area. It's harder as you get older, but every once in a while you go hang out with friends and stuff and see each other.
Mhm.
Now, do you miss owning a restaurant? Do you want to go back to that one day when kind of things get back to normal a little bit?
Um, I don't know. It was really sad when we had to close. Um, I mean, everything was sad then, though, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Because of quarantine.
yeah,
Um, but it afforded me, I had always been writing, and was had some short stories that I'd written before, but being in quarantine, we were fortunate. My husband and I stayed healthy. We weren't in need of anything, and we were
yeah.
able to stay home safely. So being home afforded me the opportunity to really focus on my writing. I did a huge revision of my novel, which it was due. That's what Ragdale was. That was a residency an artist residency that I went to for a month. My husband was very generous and didn't mind me being gone that long. And I was able to work on the novel, but then during quarantine, I really pared it down, cleaned it up. And then I started writing and revising all my shorter stories. And I've since published a couple of those, and I have some waiting to hear. And I don't think we'll open another restaurant unless my husband wants to open a bar. So it's always been his idea. He retired, I'm teaching, and he's like, we should open a restaurant in Montauk. I'm like, well, I'm not going to be there a lot because I'll be in school, but we'll do the best we can. And then he did the business end, and I did all the graphic design, as I said, and my kids all worked there. And it turned out to be just such a fun thing to do. And both restaurants had a really friendly atmosphere. You could tell people liked working there. It was a great experience, but probably won't happen again.
One of the things that you had at the restaurant that was unique was the Yeah, You Write author series. Do you want to talk
Yeah,
about that a little bit?
I love talking about, yeah, you're right. So you read my little recipe book for the literary cocktails that we serve there, but at that same workshop where I met Taya Abrat, I met Robin Martin, who's a writer that was in Salt Key Writers Workshop or Retreat, Writers Retreat. And she lived in New York. So one day she said, I would like to visit Lisa Kristel that I met. And she came to Bose, and I took her down to the lounge, which was really very pretty. It was dark and dreamy. And we're not sure who said it first, and I had been thinking of having an author series there, but I had no idea how to go about it. And she probably said, we should have a reading series here. And she was more connected in the writing world because she had been writing longer. And we just did it. I had two authors that had been my teachers come to the first one, and we put together this evening. We decided the reason we called it Yeah, You Write, WRITE, because we had a giant light up sign that had a phrase that's used in New Orleans, yeah, you write, RIGHT. And that's something you say like, hey, would you like another Sazerac? Yeah, you're right. So we had that sign made. It was prominent in the back of the restaurant, really cool. And we had the first author reading, and it was Taya Abrat and David Ebershoff, who wrote The Danish Girl, which was being the movie of that book was coming out that very year. It was 2015. And Dan Sheehan, who's Taya's husband. And the three of them read, and we're like, we don't know what to call it. And there's the sign sitting there. And Dan said, how about, yeah, you're right. And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. So I added the hashtag. And then we said, how about literary cocktails? And My the time it was the head bartender, but he became our manager, Pete Mazzulli, and I would ask the authors what their preferences were. What's your favorite alcohol or non-alcoholic, favorite flavors that you like, flavors you despise, any thoughts on cocktail culture? And I would give him what their preferences were, and he'd make a drink. And then from the recipe, I'd write out the recipe in a way that related to their novel or book or whatever, poetry, whatever it was that they were reading.
Oh, I like that.
And it was really fun. Yeah, thanks. And then that was Robin's idea to have the authors read the recipe, and some of them wrote poems about their recipes. And some of them were very shy. They'd read it and taste it and say, oh, that's good. We had one out of hundreds of, well, yeah, it was hundreds of authors who came, one who tasted it and said, oh, that's terrible. He was really funny. Saeed Sarah. It was really fun. We had open mic. And at the end, we asked, this came from Taya, she gave me the idea not to ask, because we always had 3 to 5 authors, not to ask specific questions about their work, but to ask, she called them magic pen questions. Like, it would give aspiring writers in the audience tools to be a writer. So we'd say handwritten or typed. And we go through a progression of, say, 10, 12 questions about the craft of writing. And it was fun. It was rapid fire, quick questions.
That sounds really wonderful. I would love to have been a part of something like that. That's amazing.
Well, we may reinstate it. We're looking for a new venue because it closed when we closed the restaurant, of course. So we're just starting to talk about it, Robin and I. And if you come to New York, then you can be there.
I would like that. That would give me a great reason to go there and kind of be there. I always like to do a little bit more than visit a place and just be a tourist. It's always nice to have a connection and be able to do stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the art of conversation, you have recipes too.
I do.
And I really love the recipes. I've been really getting into Polish cooking lately, and you have a lot of recipes in there. Can you want to talk about some of the recipes that you have in the book? I really think I would love to have people that listen to the show hear some of the recipes, because you're talking to the right audience. You know, they're really in tune with this.
Yeah. So it is funny being an Italian American that I focused on Polish food, although there's other kinds of food in.
Yeah, because you have Sunday gravy in there, right?
Yeah, because that's my mother, Carmela, and my granddaughter's named after her. So, and I make it all the time. So I decided once I started, there was always going to be food in the novel, but once I started doing recipes, well, even before that, I always wanted to honor my mother and things that are related to my life, just like the characters have nuances like my family. But the reason there's Polish food is I knew that Winston was going to have a problem with communication, and I extended that to the fact that people had trouble pronouncing his name.
Right.
And my son had a friend whose last name had a silent syllable in it. There was a CO in there that wasn't pronounced, and the name was kind of Polish sounding and ended in a CZ. So I made up a Polish name. I did ask a Polish person once if it sounded like a real name, and they said no. So I asked another Polish person, and they said it sounded like it was doable. So I left it the way it was. And I like that it's Kajevich. You don't pronounce the CO in the middle, not Kajakovich, like everybody wants to say. And you asked me why there's recipes. Right, so there's Polish recipes. I have him going to a Polish restaurant, which is loosely based on a restaurant on the Lower East Side. I think it's called Little Polonia. But anyway, I've been there. I did a lot of research on Polish food. I looked online for what kinds of foods were common, and I discovered first Zurek. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's a soup that has soured rye in it, and but when I wrote about it, even though I researched it, I described it the way I envisioned it. And And then I used those descriptions to create the recipes or borrow. So that's how I found Zuza Zak, who you interviewed before.
Yeah.
My son gave me her cookbook Polska for Christmas because he knew I was writing a book about Polish that had Polish characters and Polish food in it. And I actually contacted her and asked her if it would be okay if I gave her credit if I used her recipes in my book. And she said it was fine. So that was nice.
She's so nice.
Yeah, and I follow her on Instagram. That's how I found you. So what other, so I have that soup, but then, I'm looking for the recipes. I have them out. But then of course there's a scene in the book, and it's just something I think about all the time, is that every culture has its dumpling. I don't know if you remember that scene.
Yeah.
And, there's ravioli, there's dim sum, there's pierogi. So I have the characters talking about it. And then that made me think of mashups. So I decided that Winston's grandfather was going to make mashups of pierogi, but he was going to fill them with interesting things. And I just said, how about something Moroccan? And I looked up some recipes. And then our past chef, Todd McGang, I went to his house. He told me, get all the ingredients you think you need. And I bought everything for what I thought should be a Moroccan stew, what I thought should be inside Reuben stuffed pierogi. What I thought
Which sounds delicious, by the way. I think that would be really nice.
Well, I made them all. They're really good. They're really good.
That sounds good.
And he was great. He didn't do it. I said, so what should I do? He said, well, what do you think you should do? And I said, okay. And I started cooking, and he just was there beside me, and he'd give me some advice. And then we had recipes. So it was fun.
I really love the recipes you include, and it kind of helps really kind of even give the book more kind of a realism to kind of make it seem more fleshed out, so that you can kind of a more palpable sense of the whole thing.
Thank you.
I wish more books had recipes in it. I think it'd be kind of fun to see a few other authors do the same thing. And I like that. It's kind of a little fun addition, to something.
I like that. There are books like Water for Chocolate had recipes.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what it's called, but Nora Ephron had one that had a recipe, I think, at the end.
Oh, Heartburn? Was it Heartburn?
Yes, it was Heartburn. Yeah. Thank you.
I love Nora Ephron.
I guess I could have Googled that, but I didn't in time. Yeah, I love when there's food in books. I mean, food, everybody needs food, but I just have a love affair with food. But I'm no chef. You did refer to me as a chef in one of your previews, but I'll call myself an ambitious home cook. How about that?
Well, yeah, it's because you definitely have experience, with a restaurant and everything, and you make it come so alive in your writing. So
thank you.
I think I got the idea that you were a chef, but I mean, you've owned a restaurant, you've been back in the back area working there and everything. So
yeah. And then my at home, I've always loved to cook, but my daughter went to culinary school. She went to the French Culinary Institute. Now that,
oh wow.
Yeah. So she after college, she went there, and she really upped my game. She came home and taught me things. And then the chef also taught me things about cutting and blending, like just the technique things. But Liz was one of the line cooks at South Edison. She's since gone to nursing school and now is becoming a nurse practitioner. But she's very, very talented. And my son worked on the line too, and he's really good. He had a pop-up restaurant in Madrid when he lived there for a year teaching English. Yeah, his roommate taught yoga, and she said, and he loved to cook. So she said, how about we clear out the living room, and they charge people 10 euros to come and have a yoga class, and Nate did yoga too. And then he cooked dinner, and after the first couple of weeks, they had to start another night, and then they were doing it 3 times a week, and they had a wait list.
That is incredible. That sounds like a lot of fun though, too.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
I can't miss my other daughter. She worked at the restaurant too, but she was a bartender, and they all worked on the line sometimes, a little bit to help. Liz was there all the time, and Nate was the expediter. Then he was a manager later. We opened actually a fast food place for a little bit called Disco Fries. And
Nice.
he went out to open that in Minneapolis and in Madison, Wisconsin.
That sounds familiar. I don't think I've heard of that.
Well, it's a thing. It's a dish that people eat in New Jersey. It's kind of like poutine. It's
Right.
French fries with gravy, and what it is like late night diner food in Jersey. This is what I've heard. I didn't grow up in Jersey. And it's like whatever you can pick up off the disco floor after you come home. That's the phrase. But what we did was we had chef-driven recipes. So there was an Asian one, and there was a Sunday gravy one, and they were delicious. But it was actually a tough sell. The kids in the college towns we opened in wanted to eat it late at night on the weekends, but it's kind of a tough sell in the week. So it only lasted a couple of years.
I remember back in the 80s, they had that Barry Levinson film Diner where they would eat fries with gravy on it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I started asking for that in places, I think, when I got to be like a young adult.
Mm-hmm.
And they would always be like, "Oh, you must have seen the movie Diner." I'm like, yeah.
Oh, that's so funny.
Now, I want to ask you, who are some of your favorite food writers? Who are people that you really admire?
Well, I love Ruth Reichel. Is it Reichel or Reichel?
I think it's Reichel.
That's what I always thought. I read her book Tender at the Bone when it came out, and oh my goodness, I have images in my head of that book that I'll never forget. It was so good and so funny. And I've read other writing of hers, and now I follow her newsletter that she sends out, and I follow her on Instagram. And then as far as kind of like following Instagram accounts, of course I follow Zuza Zach, but I love Deb Perelman from Smitten Kitchen. And I think the reason she's so good is because besides her talent with cooking, her writing is really good when she describes a recipe, and it's funny and enjoyable, and you get to know who she is while she's writing. I like Jake Cohen, who did Jewish. Do you know that book?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love him. And the Pasta Queen cracks me up. I just have to watch her all the time. I think she may have a book now, but otherwise, and now I'm talking cookbooks. I love Rose Levy Berenbaum's Cake Bible and her other Bible books. That was like, it's a broken binding book because I use it so often. And Maida Heater's cookies, her cookie cookbooks, I have hers. And pretty much on the internet, I love Sam Sifton, New York Times, and I guess they're recipe writers and people who write about recipes. Not as much as Ruth Reichel wrote about food.
I think we share a lot of the same love of the same authors. I really love Ruth Reichel's work. Mm-hmm. She really makes places like she's written some fiction, and in addition to kind of her memoir work, mm-hmm. and she's so good. I mean, she's really made New York come alive for me in her writing about it. And I really love her work so much. I'd love to talk to her someday because she's just seems like such an interesting person. Yeah. And her take on writing is really amazing. She makes everything really come alive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's really good. I do like the scenes of her family in their kitchen just seem very real to me. I can still picture them from reading that book so long ago.
Yeah, I mean, because she's such a great personality, and she puts everything into her work so that you can almost smell the smells and taste the tastes. She's just that mm-hmm. visceral with everything. This episode is sponsored by Culinary Historians of Northern California, a Bay Area educational group dedicated to the study of food, drink, and culture in human history. To learn more about this organization and their work, please visit the website at www.chnorcal.org. We also have the link on the bio. What are some of the fiction authors that inspire you? I mean, I know we talked a little bit about, sharing books with siblings and stuff like that. Who are some of the fiction authors that really kind of got you inspired towards writing?
Well, I can't help but mention Taya Albrecht. Not that I could ever aspire to write like her, but I think her generosity of time and uh, supportiveness with my writing is inspiring. And there's another author, Jacob Appel. He
Sounds
just for the
familiar.
fact, yeah, so he writes and publishes one book after another. And he also has 9 postgraduate degrees and none
Whoa.
too shabby, like, a JD from Harvard and a doctor. He's a medical doctor. He went to Columbia. He practices as an ER doctor. And then they both read at my author reading, and Jacob, I just randomly said, Jacob, I feel like my book is a lot like some of his books are just about regular people. They're not miserable. There's maybe a happy ending, maybe not, but I said, I just don't know what to do. I'm really looking for an agent. And what do you think? And he said, well, let me see if I have time to read it. He called me the next day. It was quiet in the ER that night. He was on the overnight shift. He read the whole thing. So he and Taya for their generosity. But as far as like inspiration, I love Stephen King and
Oh
Stephen
yeah.
Graham Jones for the horror. I like to write horror in addition to this book that only has a ghost who's only scary for a few moments. And then Karen Russell, who wrote Swamplandia, and she has a short story collection, Orange World, and there's another one, Vampires in the Lemon Grove. I like it for her
Oh,
strangeness.
that is a fucking good book. Oh my God, I'm sorry, excuse my language. That
That's
book,
okay. It's
the
your
the the, the
podcast.
very last story in that one,
What? Oh, Vampires in the Lemon Grove?
yeah, the very last one, that collection seriously should have won like awards. She's so good. I really love that
I
collection
wish I
so much.
remembered which the last story
It's
was.
the story about the kids, and there's this one kid that's like a misfit, and the other kids are like a gang, and they kind of make fun of him. And then there's like at the end, I don't want to spoil it.
Yeah, that's
There's
okay.
like
Don't spoil it.
it gets into magic realism at the end, but
Oh,
like
yeah.
because all of her stuff's kind of magic realism, but like it's incredible. Like she's so good though.
She's so good. I had the opportunity to meet her because Taya was interviewing her at the New York Public Library after Orange World came out. She was having a reading, and then Taya interviewed her. So I went to the reading, and I got swept up with Taya and her class of grad students from Hunter to go out for drinks with Karen Russell and her family. So I was honored. That was really cool.
Oh,
But
that'd be
it
amazing.
was great doing the author reading. I mean, it was so exciting. We randomly, I just said, I'm going to email Michael Cunningham, Pulitzer Prize winner, amazing author, and see if he'd like to come. And he writes back, I like what you're doing. When can I come? In between teaching at Yale, I'll find time. And he came a few months later, and he was so charming and wonderful. Anyway,
Wow.
yeah, it was
That's pretty
great.
impressive. I
Very
like
good.
horror too. I read a lot of different. Do you read any other horror authors? There's so many really, I feel like there's so many really good young horror authors now. They're
Oh,
really kind of
yeah.
turning everything on its ear. It's amazing.
There's this, he's from somewhere in Scandinavia, Old Huvolt. What's his name? He has a new book called Echo, but the first one, what's it called? Witch? He's so young.
Oh
He's in
yeah,
his
yeah.
early 20s. Um, I have his name somewhere. Anyway, I like his work. And now I've been reading a lot of short horror stories because I'm trying to write them. So hopefully I'll learn something.
Yeah, it's weird because like I do the podcast and I talk a lot about food writing and food books, but like
Mhm.
I have a study that's full of literally just overstuffed bookcases full of horror and horror
Oh,
themed
yeah.
genre. Yeah. It's
What are
just
some of your favorite?
well, there's this see the stuff I like is pretty disturbing. So it's like, and I don't mean that in like a gross out way. I mean like in more of like an existential way, like
Yeah.
Kafka-esque. So there's one
Uh,
that I like, Thomas Ligotti.
oh,
His,
yeah, I know who he is.
his stuff is pretty messed up. It'll like leave you with like imprints on your brain after you read it. And John Darnell, he wrote Wolf in a White Van. It's not the stuff that would normally be called horror in the sense of Stephen King, but
Right.
it is horror, and it messes you up. Like if you read Wolf in a White Van or uh, Universal Harvester, he's got
Oh,
a
I
new one
read
coming
that.
out.
I read that.
What did you
Yeah.
think of Universal Harvester? That book is so like, after I read it, I just kind of sat still for a while, and I'm like,
Yeah.
what the fuck did I
Yeah.
just read?
The thought processes will, I, I mean, that's what my husband says. He looks at me when I read him a story. He just kind of cringes and makes a funny face and then says, "That's really good." He doesn't get it that I could do this, but yeah. And but what did Ligotti write? Because I just was reading about him.
He wrote a lot of short stories, but he has like these like he has novellas, and like my work here is just yet done, not yet done, and then he has
Mhm.
a lot of story collections like Noctuary and
Mhm.
Grimscribe in his collected works. He has like a lot of short stories, and he has one that's my favorite. It's a Lovecraft homage called The Last Feast of Harlequin. I'm also a
Mhm.
big Lovecraft collector. I collect in
Uh-huh.
Bradbury. I have a ton of Bradbury, although he's not necessarily a horror writer, but he writes horror and stuff like that.
Right, right. Yeah. So I read a lot of Lovecraft because I was like, what's everybody talking about this guy for? So yeah, I get it. I get it.
He was great.
Um,
I mean, not a great person, probably. He was a little bit messed up personally, but
oh,
great writer, though.
yeah. I did not know that he was messed up.
Yeah, kind of odd guy. So if you could cook dinner for 10 people living or dead, who would you invite? And this could be anybody.
Mhm.
Somebody you know or don't know, somebody from history. And then who would you invite and what would you serve to them?
Well, it's funny that you should ask this question because the last question I asked when I had the authors at Bose was, if you could invite any person in the writing world, living or dead, to have a drink with you at Bose, who would it be? I didn't give them a chance to pick 10 though. I would definitely cook my version of my mother's Sunday gravy, which is the Long Island Italian, or maybe it's just the Italian American way of saying Sunday tomato sauce with meatballs, sausages, and ribs, and whatever else you put in it, because it's so good and it's a crowd pleaser. I would definitely make that. I mean, unless they're vegetarians, then it would be a problem. And
Yeah.
I would invite first, well, the first person I would invite, besides all my friends, they're the first ones I thought of, but that's because of quarantine, because I don't get to see them so much. But now we can do that. So I don't have to do that. I'm going to invite Julia Child
Mm,
and maybe even Graham Kerr, the Galloping
wow.
Gourmet. When I was a little girl, anytime there was no school, or if I was home from school because I was sick, my mother would put me in her bed and put the little portable TV on her dresser, and I watched Julia Child and Graham Kerr, and I would write the recipes down as I think I wrote Julia's recipe for brains and brown butter sauce when I was 9 in my social studies notebook. Oh, I love her. Anyway, so Julia, Graham Kerr, I guess I'd really like Stephen King to come, and then maybe he
Ah,
could bring his band.
nice, nice.
And how about Guillermo del Toro? He'd be
That would
fun
be
to
great.
talk to. Yeah,
I
a
like
little
that.
horror. And then music people, I think I want Elvis Costello because he's brilliant and I
Yeah,
love his music. David Bowie,
nice.
yeah, I love him too. And then I thought Josephine Baker, always liked her, but then I was listening to your interview of Nick Malgeri, and he
Yeah,
mentioned that he worked in Monte Carlo and that Josephine Baker would come in and say, bonsoir, cuisinière, or whatever you say, people in the kitchen in French. And I love that little anecdote. So it reminded me of her. And then I think I would invite George Saunders because not only is he an incredible author, I think he's really funny. I don't know if that's 10 people,
that's
but
a great group, though. Wow, just to be there with all those people would be pretty awesome.
yeah, wouldn't it? I
Ah,
would like that. But I
now,
don't know if I wouldn't be able to eat. I'd be so excited.
picking up on what you said just last question, what kind of music do you play when you're cooking? Do you have like a playlist?
I do. So my husband puts on, I'm not really good at the system, but he does something with his phone and the music comes out. And I always ask him, my first choice is usually Tito Puente. I
Nice.
love Tito Puente's
Oh
music.
yeah.
Anything, I love dance music and dancing around.
Yeah.
Or Motown.
Nice.
And then classic rock and roll, got to have the Stones or the Beatles. But then sometimes I want classical music. So I like Mozart, but I love Rachmaninoff because of the way he pounds the keys. And I just recently started wanting to hear the Bach cello concertos because I took up the viola, and my instructor has a station on YouTube and a channel on YouTube, and he's been playing the Bach cello concertos on his viola. And
Nice.
they're awesome. So yeah, I'm kind of eclectic with music. I like a lot of different music.
I like that. I get to see you cooking in the kitchen, listening to all this. It sounds great.
It's fun. I do enjoy it.
So what is next for you?
Well, I'm going to keep searching for an agent to help me sell my novel, which I haven't sent out any queries lately, but there is an agent who has asked for the full manuscript. So we'll see if she writes back. And then I'm going to keep on writing short and strange fiction.
Nice.
Trying to find homes for those. And I'm not sure why I'm kind of blogging about food, because after I listened to your the chubby chef or kitchen, chubby kitchen.
The chubby kitchen, yeah.
Oh my goodness, she was amazing.
She was, yeah.
And how you said her photography is beautiful. I mean, I take with my iPhone, and every picture invariably has a shadow of the phone on it.
Me too.
And I love cooking and I love eating. I'm an all-star eater. I eat all the foods.
Me too.
But I guess it's just, we're in the age of the internet, and I guess it's just fun sharing it. So I think I'm going to I do have a website, but I won't tell anyone what it is yet because it's messy and I need to figure out how to fix it. But I'd like to have, more of a presence about food. And since my novel is about food, I think it all ties together. So I'm going to keep on working on that.
Well, Lisa, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and the art of conversation is too good to not get snatched up soon. So I am here to say it now. And people who are listening know this book will be out. I predict that it'll be out very soon, and look for it. And if there's any agents out there, I'll be glad to put you in contact with Lisa.
Oh, well, thanks, Dean. And it was so nice talking to you too.
It was my conversation with Lisa Amico Kristel, author of the forthcoming The Art of Conversation. Had a really great time talking with Lisa, and I hope she comes back again soon. Really loved having a chance to talk to her. I could talk to her all day. Now, also coming up this next week is going to be Constance L. Kirker and Mary Newman, author of numerous books on food and food writing. Their book Coconut will be out soon, and I'll be talking with them about that book and their book Edible Flowers and a few others. They'll be here on Monday, and then Christopher Schaefer is going to be on Wednesday. He has a wonderful book called Moon over Sasova, What America's Experience Teaching in Post-Cold War Slovakia. It's a departure from our usual talk on cooking and food writing, but I really loved this book and had a chance to talk to Christopher, so I wanted to have him on the podcast. So we also have John Birdsall, who I'm sure you all know, who's a famous food writer. He'll be here on Friday, and his book, The Man Who Ate Too Much, which is a biography about James Beard, he'll be here on Friday. I'm looking very much forward to having you all hear my conversation with him. Such a wonderful man to talk to, and so gracious to be on the podcast. Until then, I hope all of you have a wonderful weekend and get a chance to do some really great cooking. Contact me through email if you ever want to talk about the program and food. I'm always happy to talk to people about food and food writing. Any recommendations you want to send my way, I'm very accessible. So that being said, again, have a great weekend. Hope you get to do some great cooking, and also keep cooking.